History is not just the story of kings and monuments. It is the story of hands that built, minds that planned, and lives that quietly shaped the world. Hello, and welcome to Night in History. When you look at the Great Pyramid of Khufu, you see a monument built for a god, a vision of stone and light rising to meet the sun. You see the ultimate symbol of ancient mystery, a structure born from legend and speculation, standing against the vast canvas of the desert sky. It is a work of immense ambition, built to defy the passage of time and the erosion of memory, a feat of human will against the scale of nature. A testament to the colossal power of a unified state and the meticulous application of simple physics. But tonight, we will deliberately look past the mystery, the gold, and the divine ambition. We will look beyond the chaos of the spectacle and focus entirely on the quiet, simple reality of the logistical process beneath it all. This colossal structure, an assembly of over 2 million stone blocks weighing 6 million tons, was not built by magic or by slaves or by visitors from the stars. It was built by process, by organization, by a sheer, relentless, rhythmic human effort that sustained itself for over 2 decades. The story of the pyramid is the untold story of the administrative genius required to execute a single sustained vision across 7,300 days of disciplined heavy labor. This massive project was the ultimate expression of the Old Kingdom's bureaucratic and social mastery, turning human effort into geometric permanence, a lasting legacy built on the synchronization of thousands of lives and the ceaseless monitoring of resources and time. Day in and day out for 20 continuous years. Tonight, we will join the royal work crew outside Giza in 2560 BC. We will experience the entire process from start to finish. We will follow a single block of stone from the moment it is quarried from the dry bedrock, through the brutal rhythm of its hauling to its final, quiet placement deep within the pyramid. It is a story not of sudden grandeur, but of the immense coordinated patience required for a long, 20-year commitment. It is the untold story of the ancient laborer and the world of logistics they inhabited, a world built on consistent rhythm and unwavering commitment to a single, colossal task. The sheer duration of the project, 2 decades of continuous effort, required a national will unparalleled in the ancient world, a faith in centralized long-term planning that modern projects rarely achieve, demanding a rhythm of life entirely dedicated to the needs of the construction. But before our journey begins, please take a moment to gently like the video and subscribe. It's a simple and wonderful way to support the channel, and it means a great deal to me. I'm also always curious to know where in the world and at what time you're settling in to listen tonight. So, I'd truly love to hear from you in the comments below. And now, settle in. Let the noise of the modern world fade away. Our quiet process begins not at the finished peak of the pyramid, but in the desolate, sun-blasted quarry that fed it, the essential point of origin for all the weight that followed, the place where the raw stone was first converted into the building blocks of eternity. The sheer scale of the Great Pyramid requires a quiet moment of profound contemplation. It contains over 2.3 million individual blocks of stone, weighing in total more than 6 million tons. This mass had to be perfectly placed on a single, massive, stable base, requiring stability and precision that still defies belief. An exercise in massive-scale pre-planning, executed with only the simplest tools and an intense understanding of basic geometry. The entire enterprise begins not with stone and muscle, but with geometry and silence. Before a single block was hauled, the ancient engineers had to establish a vast, precise square, aligned almost perfectly to true north. This initial phase was the silent intellectual burden of the architects, the men whose only tools were rope, water, and the position of the stars. A profound act of faith in mathematical certainty and astronomical observation, locking the monument to the cosmos itself. This required years of meticulous, quiet effort. The engineers used simple tools, plumb bobs and the precision of the stars, to ensure the 13-acre foundation was absolutely level. Their key tool for this was water. They carved shallow trenches across the entire plateau and filled them, using the water's surface as an absolute unmoving gauge, leveling the immense site with hydraulic precision, ensuring no single section was uneven, and that the structural load would be perfectly distributed across the bedrock. The laborers then spent long, grueling hours hammering away at the high spots of the bedrock until the water level was uniform across the entire base. The initial sound of construction here was not a roar, but the subtle, slow sound of water being adjusted and checked, a gentle contrast to the thunder that would soon follow. This dedication to perfect level groundwork was the unsung engineering masterpiece of the pyramid, the very foundation of its endurance, ensuring that the base could bear the crushing load of the structure above it without fracture or shift over millennia, transforming a natural hill into a geometric plate of absolute stability. Once the geometry was perfect, the real physical labor began in the quarry. The vast majority of the over 2 million blocks of local limestone would be cut from the bedrock of the Giza Plateau itself, just hundreds of yards from the final site. Imagine yourself as one of the quarrymen now. Your world is one of punishing reflective heat. The sun beating down on the pale stone. The air is thick with a dry, chalky powder, pulverized silica dust that coats your throat and lashes your eyes. Every breath is a dry, dusty experience, and the light is blindingly white, reflecting off the limestone, forcing you to squint against the glare, even in the hours before noon. This constant, abrasive environment demanded profound endurance, testing the limits of human resilience under the relentless Egyptian sun. You work in a team of 4, perhaps 6. Your primary tools are made of copper and dolerite. The soft copper chisels are used only to refine the edges, but are useless against the core material. The true work is done with the dolerite pounders. These are massive, hard, rounded stones, and your job is to swing them over and over, pounding a precise line of holes into the bedrock. You take your turn, stepping forward into the heat. You raise the heavy pounder high above your head. You bring it down. Thud. You feel the shock of the impact deep in your shoulders, up your arms, and into your teeth. You do it again. Thud. This is the relentless, monotonous rhythm of the quarry, the sound of stone destroying stone, the necessary violence that begets permanence. This is the ponos, the purposeful, sustained effort that forges the rock into a monument. The sheer effort is immense. You are fighting the very geology of the plateau, turning a natural mountain into a human-made one, block by single block, without the aid of iron or steel. The noise is a constant, heavy drone, a signature sound of industrial-scale production. The process demands absolute, unwavering focus. Any deviation in the line of holes could ruin the entire block, wasting hours of collective effort. The heat rises, shimmering off the stone, and the noise of the pounders becomes a dull, heavy drone that settles deep in your chest. The sound is inescapable. You live inside this metallic thudding, the rhythm controlling your movements and your thoughts, pushing you past the point of exhaustion, forcing you into a meditative state of sustained suffering. This synchronization of effort under duress was the quarry's core logistical output, a perfectly tuned human machine, working in harmony with the stone itself. Crucially, the copper tools themselves require constant, organized maintenance. An unseen, parallel logistics chain runs constantly, dedicated solely to sharpening and repairing the thousands of soft copper chisels and wedges that dull rapidly against the abrasive stone. The success of the pyramid depends not only on the men swinging the pounders, but on the disciplined rhythm of the smith's hammers far away, working tirelessly to replenish the supply. This supporting infrastructure of metal workers, potters, and rope makers ensures the constant flow of material is never interrupted by a broken tool or a frayed rope, a quiet testament to the scale of the administrative control. The final act of separation is slow and sure. After the line of holes is pounded deep, dry wooden wedges are driven into the rock. These are then soaked, saturated with water. The water swells the wood slowly, with immense, irresistible force, causing the bedrock to finally crack, separating a clean, rectangular block from the earth. The crack is a sudden, sharp sound, a momentary release in the pervasive thudding that defines this place. This sound of separation signals that the block is now ready for the next equally massive challenge, the journey to the site. The selection of the Giza Plateau was not arbitrary. It was a profound act of geological and logistical genius. The entire enterprise was predicated on the bedrock itself. The site offered two non-negotiable advantages: height and composition. The plateau's natural elevation above the Nile floodplain ensured the monumental structure would never be inundated. This geological high ground provided a natural, stable defense against the river's inevitable yearly rise. The inherent stability of the Tura limestone bedrock that formed the plateau provided the perfect foundation. This rock was dense and uniform, capable of withstanding the immense concentrated weight of the pyramid without shifting or settling unevenly over millennia. The pyramid's endurance is as much a testament to the quality of the foundation as it is to the quality of the construction. The proximity of the core construction material was the second fortune. The vast majority of the 2.3 million blocks were quarried right there on the plateau itself. This eliminated the most difficult and expensive logistical challenge: long-distance overland transport. The sound of the grinding dolomite pounders operating just a few hundred yards from the growing pyramid was the sound of a perfectly optimized supply chain. Furthermore, the site was already a sacred space. It offered a clear, commanding western horizon where the sun set, a place associated with the journey of the sun god Re into the afterlife. By choosing this location, the builders were integrating the Pharaonic tomb into the natural, sacred geography of the Egyptian cosmos. The sound of the grinding stone was therefore not just labor. It was the sound of geology and divinity being fused together. This grueling work, The constant swinging and pounding required immense physical energy. The organization that fed the builders, the provisioning system, was a logistical marvel almost as impressive as the pyramid itself. You are not paid in coin, you are paid in provisions. Your basic daily payment is a consistent, reliable ration of bread and beer. The bread is coarse, heavy, and made from barley, often mixed with gritty remnants from the grinding process, making it tough to chew. The beer is not the clear, bubbly drink of a later age. It is thick, nutritious, and low alcohol, more like a liquid bread or porridge. It serves as a safe drink, a critical source of calories, and a relief from the unending heat. Your diet is supplemented by onions and dried or salted fish caught from the Nile. This guaranteed ration, provided by a highly organized, centralized state, was the true currency of Giza. It ensured the workforce had the strength to perform the crushing, sustained labor required. It was the state's binding contract with its workers, guaranteeing their return year after year, and eliminating the instability of a dissatisfied, hungry workforce. This reliable caloric input, far exceeding the resources of a common farmer, was the silent engine of the entire construction effort, a testament to the state's organizational ability to feed tens of thousands of men daily. But not all stone could be found at Giza. The most beautiful and valuable stones, the fine, white Tura limestone used for the casing, and the red Aswan granite for the inner chambers, had to be transported hundreds of miles via the Nile. The river was the true highway. Imagine the Great Nile itself during the season of the inundation, the annual flood. This was the critical window, lasting only a few months, when the low desert was transformed into a usable water highway. This seasonal surge of water was the natural, providential force that made the long-distance haul of the granite from Aswan, 500 miles south, possible, turning the desert valley into a temporary massive inland sea, minimizing the need for costly land transport and maximizing the efficiency of the pull. Giant barges, built in the massive centralized shipyards near the work camp, are loaded with the shining granite from Aswan. The noise of the river is a busy, disciplined murmur. You hear the rhythmic call of the boatswain, the low thud of thick flax ropes tying off the immense cargo, and the gentle lapping of the Nile against the massive wooden hull. The air here is thick with the cool, damp smell of the river, a profound relief from the dry heat of the quarry. You can hear the low, repetitive sound of the oars dipping into the slow, powerful current, pushing the heavy barges northwards. The barges move with a slow, powerful, inevitable grace, carrying millions of tons of stone up the river. This movement is the effortless majesty of nature serving the ambition of man, converting the river's own force into forward motion. A silent, powerful contrast to the human struggle on land. The final logistical key was the harbor. Archaeological evidence shows that the Giza Plateau was connected to the Nile via a massive man-made harbor and canal system. During the flood season, this network brought the massive barges right up to the base of the plateau. The construction site was essentially waterfront property. This complex of docks, retaining walls and transport canals was an engineering marvel in its own right, existing only to facilitate the smooth, fast transfer of stone from water to land. A masterpiece of hydraulic engineering dedicated entirely to the flow of materials into the construction zone. This brilliant use of the floodwaters dramatically reduced the initial hauling distance. Instead of pulling a 2.5-ton block for miles over dry sand, the crews only had to pull it a short distance from the water's edge up onto the plateau. This single piece of engineering saved millions of man-hours and was the ultimate expression of logistical genius, harnessing the immense power of the inundation. The entire project was a monument to water management and coordinated timing, relying on the precise seasonal fluctuations of the river. This is where the muscle and organization of the Pharaoh's gangs came into play, the thousands of dedicated haulers waiting for the cargo to arrive from the water, ready to receive the immense flow of material from the south, standing ready to take over the burden from the current, initiating the final agonizing phase of land transport. The transition from river transport to land haulage was a precisely choreographed event, minimizing the delay between cutting the stone and setting it in place. To understand the scale of the Nile transport, one must consider the counterflow. While the barges were bringing up granite and Tura limestone, a constant stream of other goods had to be moving down the Nile to the Giza site. These were not luxury goods, but the mundane, necessary materials of daily construction. Massive quantities of wood for rollers, sledges, and scaffolding. Thousands of feet of flax rope for hauling. Huge volumes of clay and mud for the ramp construction and lubrication, and all the specialized materials for the workshops and bakeries. The Nile was a constant two-way logistical artery, its surface never truly empty, a freeway of ancient commerce, operating with relentless efficiency. Imagine a scribe seated at a temporary riverside dock, using simple papyrus and reed pens to keep meticulous records of incoming and outgoing materials. His work, quiet and detailed, was as essential to the pyramid's completion as the thousands of haulers. He had to account for every sack of barley and every replacement copper tool. The entire project was an exercise in pure administration, where the stone itself was merely a commodity moved across a vast, complex, water-based network. This scribe's ledger, tracking the constant, slow movement of materials, was the true blueprint of the pyramid, documenting the mundane reality of the divine project, a reality of counting, weighing, and cataloging every last grain and stone. The river was also the ultimate source of the life needed to sustain the work. Without the Nile, the entire desert operation would have failed within days. The water that wet the clay ramps, the water used to swell the wooden wedges in the quarry, the water used to brew the life-sustaining beer, all of it flowed down this one singular artery. The sound of the river, therefore, was not just ambience. It was the sound of life, the sound of the entire colossal effort being fed and sustained. The cool, constant flow of the Nile offered a momentary reprieve, a taste of life outside the relentless heat and dust of the quarry, a profound blessing in the middle of a barren landscape, providing the energy for the next day's labor. The organization of this river traffic was flawless. Barges were loaded not just with stone, but with specialized provisions, ensuring the supply chain was uninterrupted. The captains of these barges were skilled navigators, moving their heavy loads across the shifting channels of the river with a professional silence, focused entirely on the single goal of reaching the Giza dock before the inundation receded. Their effort was one of patient, disciplined seamanship, a quiet contrast to the roaring chaos that would soon meet the stone at the unloading docks. The construction of the pyramid was not managed by shouting alone. It was overseen by a vast, organized and largely silent bureaucracy of scribes and administrators. Their work was the true unseen miracle of Giza, the invisible framework that prevented the entire project from collapsing into chaos. A feat of sustained administrative control unparalleled in the ancient world. The scribes were the masters of time. Their records documented the rotation of the workforce, the delivery of rations, and the daily progress of stone placement. The rustle of their papyrus, the scratch of their reed pens, and the low, constant murmur of men dictating inventories were the true sounds of the administrative heart of Giza. Their ledgers ensured that the immense, complex machine kept running for 20 continuous years, tracking every single resource with meticulous care. Imagine the sheer volume of bookkeeping required, recording the daily output of the quarry, tracking the thousands of yards of rope needed for the haulers, and forecasting the barley requirement for the next seasonal shift of workers. This constant accounting ensured the project never ran out of a critical resource, or, more importantly, never ran out of food. Their quiet, repetitive work of counting and cataloguing was the ultimate expression of Egyptian state power, the silent foundation of pharaonic might. The most valuable records were the supply manifests. These documents detailed the exact number of loaves of bread, the liters of beer, the amount of meat, and the quantity of protective garments issued to each file and say. This accountability was the absolute key to preventing corruption and maintaining worker loyalty. Every single ration consumed was recorded, checked, and balanced by the scribes. The entire administrative corps operated with the rigid, mechanical precision of the finest Swiss clock, albeit one made of clay, papyrus, and human dedication. The physical reality of the pyramid's construction was defined by the tools' extreme fragility. They had an incredibly short lifespan. The effort required was not just to move stone, but to constantly replace the implements used to move it. Dolerite and stone. The primary quarrying tool was the dolerite pounder. These hard, igneous stone balls were used without handles, swung repeatedly against the bedrock to create fracture lines. Each strike chipped away at the dolerite itself. A single quarryman might consume dozens of these tools over his 3-month rotation. The logistics team had to ensure a continuous supply of replacement dolerite and granite balls, bringing them from far-off quarries to maintain the necessary output, copper and bronze. The finest work, dressing the stone, setting precise cuts, was done with copper chisels. In the absence of hardening agents like iron, these tools blunted instantly against abrasive stone. The smiths' workshops in the workers' city were industrial-scale operations dedicated solely to the perpetual cycle of sharpening and annealing, softening by fire, the thousands of chisels used daily. The clang-clang of their hammers, heard constantly from dawn until dusk, was the pulse of the maintenance machine, wood and rope. Wood was the most precious commodity, brought from Lebanon, cedar, or tropical Africa, ebony. It was needed for sledges, levers and rollers. These rollers, placed beneath the sledges on the clay track, constantly splintered under the multi-ton load and required immediate replacement by dedicated teams of carpenters. The long, fibrous flax ropes were subject to immense tension during the pull. As they snapped, they had to be replaced by the constant output of the rope workshops. The entire construction process was, in essence, a perpetual crisis management operation centered on the short, violent lifespan of its own tools. The colossal human effort at Giza was fundamentally tethered to the most basic of needs: water. The entire operation was a fragile ecosystem perched on the edge of the desert, entirely dependent on the Nile's reliability. The water was needed not just for drinking, but for the industrial process itself, wetting the clay track for the haulers, swelling the wooden wedges for the quarry, and brewing the essential beer ration. Imagine the specialized workforce of water carriers, the men whose only job was the relentless, continuous movement of water from the canals and the harbor to the dry, dusty work sites and the hot bakeries. They moved with a steady, monotonous rhythm, their large clay jars heavy on their shoulders, ensuring the entire enterprise did not grind to a halt from thirst or friction. Their sound was the quiet, rhythmic slosh-slosh of water, a constant, necessary counterpoint to the Hauling Chant. The disease risk was an ever-present, silent killer. The dense, temporary housing, the large crowds, and the unsanitary conditions near the industrial areas meant that fevers, dysentery, and parasites were constant threats to the workforce. The discovery of organized medical care proves the state understood this risk. The state invested in surgeons and physicians to keep the valuable workforce healthy. The atmosphere would have been marked by the dry smell of dust, mixed with the sharp scent of medicinal herbs used by the healers, a constant battle waged by the Egyptian state against the microbial world. The reliance on the Nile's predictable annual flood made the entire project a monument to climatic fortune. Any deviation in the flood level, too high or too low, could have been disastrous. A low flood meant less navigable water for the massive granite barges and less water for the agricultural surplus that fed the city. A high flood meant damage to the harbor and the workers' city. The scribes meticulously monitored the Nile's height, knowing that the simple annual measurement determined the fate of the entire project. The construction of the pyramid was not just an act of moving stone. It was an act of constant industrial-scale material replacement. Every single piece of equipment used by the hauling crews, the ropes, the sledges, the tools, was subject to relentless wear and tear. The rope economy was critical. The flax ropes used to pull the heavy sledges were thick, fibrous, and brutally strained. They frayed, snapped, and wore down at an alarming rate. A dedicated workforce, operating in specialized workshops within the workers' city, was tasked solely with the continuous spinning and weaving of thousands of meters of replacement rope. The sound of their work, the steady whir of the spinning wheels and the taut snap of the fibers, was a quiet, continuous metronome of the project's internal industry. Without this silent, disciplined production line, the hauling would cease within days. The constant need for tool replacement was even more urgent. The Dolerite pounders shattered, the copper chisels dulled and bent. The project required an army of coppersmiths working constantly to meet demand. The rhythmic clang, clang, clang of the hammers on copper far from the site was the pulse of the essential supporting machine. This was the ancient world's assembly line, not building a ship, but supplying the tools to build a monument, requiring the same precise scheduling and material management as the Venetian arsenal of later ages. Now, imagine the men who received this continuous flow of supplies, the Pharaoh's gangs, the hauling crew. Their job was the final translation of logistics into motion. The movement of these blocks, particularly the multi-ton granite beams, required not only brute strength but perfect unified rhythm and organization. The transfer from the dock to the land was the moment the raw, collective physical power of the workforce was unleashed, the final, desperate struggle against gravity and friction. You are a member of a hauling crew, one of the two main groups, the strong ones and the enduring ones. You are part of a team of perhaps 20 men pulling a single 2.5-ton block. The size of the crew was deliberately calculated to provide just enough force to move the stone efficiently, maximizing the output of the work. The block is lashed to a sturdy wooden sledge. Crucially, the ground is prepared with a layer of wet clay and mud to dramatically reduce friction, making the pull manageable. This single, simple act of lubrication transforms the impossible into the agonizingly possible, minimizing the waste of human energy and converting sheer pull into forward motion. The sight of this prepared track, slick and wet against the dry desert, was a constant reminder of the fight against the environment. A small river of mud designed solely to aid transport. The process is monotonous, relentless, and brutally hot. The sun beats down on your bare back. Dust cakes your throat. You feel the constant heavy strain against the rope across your chest. The rough flax rope bites deeply into the calloused skin of your palms, making the skin raw, slick with sweat, and rough with grit. The feel of the rope, thick and fibrous, becomes the physical anchor of your existence, a tangible connection to the mass you are dragging, a line of profound tension. To prevent the crew from collapsing into disorganized chaos, the movement is governed by the chant. The foreman does not yell or threaten. He calls out a rhythmic, simple series of sounds that synchronize the pull of 24 men into a single massive heave. The voice of the foreman is the metronome of the project, a low, authoritative sound cutting through the heavy air, a tool of pure physics disguised as song, ensuring the collective power is applied at the exact, necessary moment. Ha, hep, ha, hep, pull, breathe, pull, breathe. The sound of the stone scraping against the wet clay is continuous, a low, powerful rasp that signals progress. Every few minutes, the team stops. Ropes are inspected. Water is passed around. The foreman checks the sledge runners. Then the chant resumes. The entire cycle is one of sustained, controlled release of energy, a constant battle against fatigue and friction, punctuated only by brief, desperate stops for rest and correction. This is the process. Pull, stop, correct, pull. Imagine standing on the construction ramp, watching countless hauling teams, 1,000 men moving at once, each guided by its own rhythmic chant. The noise is not a chaotic yell. It is a profound, organized thrum of human effort, the pulse of the pyramid rising from the earth. The sound itself becomes part of the endurance, a metronome of sustained effort that keeps the body moving long after the mind has grown numb. The visual image is staggering, a massive, slow-moving river of human flesh, rope and stone flowing inexorably upward, fueled by bread, beer, and the shared rhythm of the chant. The efficacy of the hauling was entirely dependent on synchronization. If men pulled slightly out of rhythm, the effort was wasted, and the stone would remain stubbornly fixed. The chant, therefore, was not merely music. It was applied physics, converting chaotic individual strength into a single unified vector of force. The lead hauler at the front of the rope had the most demanding job, not of pulling but of timing the application of force, setting the necessary pace for the dozens of men behind him, a complex task of embodied mathematics. Imagine the feeling in your muscles after 3 full hours of this labor. Every fiber screams in protest. The air is thick with the smell of sweat, mud, and dust. Yet, when the foreman calls the chant, a profound, almost religious obligation forces you to pull again. Your life is now tethered to the movement of this one heavy stone, and its slow, inevitable progress up the ramp is the only meaning your body knows. The stone must move, and you must move it. That is the only reality. The exhaustion is absolute, a deep, resonant ache that permeates the bones. Yet the rhythm demands compliance. The sheer mass of the granite block is now approaching the base of the pyramid. The heat from the white stone is immense, reflecting the sun back up into the dry air. You grab the thick, rough flax rope once more. You can feel the sharp bite of the fibers against the calloused skin of your palms. Your back is screaming, but you brace your feet, sink your center of gravity low to the ground, and wait for the foreman's call. The goal is so close, but the stone is heavy. You must fight gravity now, pulling the block onto the first, lowest layer of the structure. The foreman begins the call again, lower, slower, demanding deep reserves of strength. Ha! Hep! You pull. Every muscle is engaged. You focus on the rhythm, pulling against the resistance. The granite block groans against the clay track. It moves forward a single foot. You fall back, breathing heavily. This single, isolated act, the brief coordinated surge of human strength, is the truth of the pyramids. Not the mystery, but the muscle. Not the legend, but the logistics. This is the reality. The life of a worker on the Giza Plateau was governed by the unwavering rhythm of the work gang. The day began not with the sun, but long before it, to maximize the cool hours of the morning. The sound of the foreman's low whistle or call would shatter the silence of the barracks, signaling the immediate start of the shift. The work units, the Jed gangs, were highly competitive. Graffiti found in tombs and on the blocks themselves shows that these gangs often gave themselves fiercely loyal and sometimes humorous names, such as the Friends of Khufu or the Drunks of Menkaure. This internal rivalry was encouraged by the overseers, fostering competition to increase efficiency and output. The sound of the morning assembly was a mixture of sleepy murmurs and the sharp, excited calls of the foreman counting heads and checking tools. The entire day was structured around the pull, stop, correct, pull rhythm of the hauling. The intense labor was broken by strictly monitored rest periods. The workers' primary taskmasters were thirst and heat, not the lash. The efficiency of the operation was paramount, and fainting or exhausted men simply slowed the workflow. The overseers were there not merely to push the men, but to ensure the pace was sustainable and the synchronization flawless. The pervasive sound of the plateau was the Hauling Chant, the constant, low, hypnotic drone that bound thousands of separate bodies into a single, cohesive, powerful unit. To sustain this 20-year commitment, the Egyptian state perfected an elaborate system of labor organization based not on individual conscription, but on immense rotating units of manpower. This was the unseen architecture of the workforce itself. The entire labor force, which peaked at tens of thousands, was organized hierarchically into what we might call Pharaonic regiments. At the top was the file, or division, a group of perhaps 20,000 men. Each file was divided into smaller SA, or companies, consisting of several thousand. These companies were further broken down into weir, or platoons, and finally into the smallest working units. The Jed, or gangs, the teams of 10-20 men who pulled a single sledge. Imagine the sound of this structure in action. It was not a mass of individuals shouting, but the synchronized power of thousands of Jed teams, each pulling on its own rope, governed by a low, rhythmic work chant. The foreman of the Jed was responsible for the rhythm, ensuring the collective power was applied at the precise moment to overcome inertia. The rotation system was the critical administrative key. These vast files were often composed of skilled workers and farmers rotating onto the Giza Plateau for short periods, perhaps 3 to 4 months during the season of the inundation, when the Nile flooded and farm work ceased. This influx of seasonal labor allowed the state to mobilize the maximum required manpower without permanently destroying the agricultural economy. The workers were compensated and highly motivated. They returned to their homes with reliable rations, a full stomach, and the honor of contributing to the divine project. This system created a profound psychological stability. The laborers knew their service had an end date, making the immediate, brutal effort tolerable. They were not slaves bound for life, but citizens fulfilling a sacred, temporary duty to their god-king. The entire structure ensured that the physical ponos was converted efficiently into permanent stone. As the base layers of the pyramid were finished, the next great challenge was height. The entire structure was built using a massive wrapping ramp, a long, gently sloping earthen ramp that encircled the structure, allowing the sledges to be dragged up to the working height. This ramp was a temporary mountain of clay and gypsum, constantly built up as the pyramid rose, consuming millions of tons of earth and labor itself. This temporary structure was a masterpiece of civil engineering, existing only to facilitate the final form. The construction of the ramp itself required meticulous planning, ensuring the slope remained gradual enough for the hauling teams to manage the heavy load without losing traction or collapsing. The construction of the ramp required its own dedicated workforce, a team whose sole purpose was to build and maintain the necessary infrastructure for the hauler. The dimensions of the ramp were carefully calculated. Too steep, and the men would fail under the weight. Too shallow, and the ramp would consume too much time and material. The process of hauling stone up this massive spiral structure was the dominant rhythm of the construction site for nearly 2 decades. The sound of thousands of feet shuffling on the packed earth of the ramp, combined with the low, constant groan of the wooden rollers used beneath the sledges, was the sound of the vertical city, the heart of the upward struggle. Imagine standing on this ramp in the final years of Khufu's reign. The air is thinner here, and the sight of the work below is immense. The desert stretches out to the horizon. Your focus is now entirely on the block in front of you, being guided into its final resting spot. The uphill pull was a brutal translation of force into vertical movement. The process relied on simple machines, wooden rollers beneath the sledges, which produced a sharp, high-pitched squeak under immense load. The atmosphere is one of focused tension. The sound of the chanting is now interspersed with the sound of the rollers grinding against the dry wood, a testament to the immense friction being overcome by sheer human will. The constant need for maintenance on the ramps was a logistical necessity. The wooden rollers constantly splintered and cracked under the weight. The clay track wore out, and the slope needed continuous adjustment. A dedicated team of carpenters, their saws and hammers providing a steady, distant tap-tap-tap of repairs, worked ceaselessly to keep the artery of the ramp clear and functional. Their effort was quiet, essential, and entirely focused on preserving the upward flow of material, the lifeblood of the construction. The final placement of the blocks demanded exceptional, quiet skill. This was the work of master stonemasons, not brute force. They used simple, profound tools, square levels, plumb bobs, and precise sighting lines to ensure the seams between blocks were virtually invisible. This is the work of true craftsmanship. A quiet, focused moment after the raw effort of the hauling. The sound is now delicate. The light metallic tap of a stone wedge being placed, or the soft hiss of a rope being slowly paid out under tension. This transition from the noisy communal effort of the ramp to the quiet, precise work of the stonemasons marked the final, crucial stage of the pyramid's ascent. A shift from blunt force to geometric precision. While the exterior of the pyramid was a matter of sustained brute force, the inner architecture was an exercise in unique, fatal precision. The pharaoh's burial chamber, the true heart of the pyramid, was an engineering puzzle solved in silence and darkness. The grand gallery, the immense soaring passage that leads to the king's chamber, is a marvel of confined space engineering. It ascends at a perfect angle, its high corbelled ceiling created by blocks that lean inward slightly at every layer. The construction required moving the massive, highly polished limestone blocks up this steep, narrow corridor before the roof was sealed, a vertical staging effort relying entirely on precise wooden scaffolding. The only light inside would have been the flicker of oil lamps, casting immense, shifting shadows on the smooth walls. The king's chamber itself, built entirely of massive, smooth red Aswan granite, is the culmination of the effort. The placement of these granite beams, some weighing over 60 tons, was achieved using the sand filling technique. A massive pit was dug, and the granite beam was placed on top of sand in the pit. The chamber walls were then built around it. The sand was then slowly, precisely released through a small hole, causing the entire 60-ton beam to descend, inch by grinding inch, into its final position. Above the chamber, 5 relieving chambers were built, layers of massive granite blocks separated by small air spaces. These chambers were designed to divert the immense weight of the overlying pyramid blocks away from the king's chamber roof, preventing the ceiling from collapsing under the stress of 6 million tons of stone. Imagine the atmosphere in these dark, confined passages. The air was thick and humid, the only sound the low murmur of the overseers and the quiet, high-pitched scrape of the final smoothing tools working the granite. This interior space, built in total darkness and sealed forever after construction, represents the final, silent act of the workforce, a monument to light, built entirely in the eternal dark. The final internal work of the pyramid involved an engineering challenge that was the exact opposite of construction: deconstruction and sealing. The most critical phase was securing the king's chamber and its passages, ensuring the royal body and treasures were isolated from the world for eternity. This process required moving and dropping immense, polished portcullis slabs, massive granite blocks designed to slide down narrow, internal grooves to seal the main corridors. The movement of these slabs was an act of irreversible final engineering. Once dropped, the pyramid was sealed forever. The sound inside these dark passages would have been terrifying. The thunderous groan and shudder of the colossal slab dropping into its final place, an event that would have resonated through the entire core of the pyramid. Following the main ceiling, specialized teams worked in the confined corridors, using smaller, specially cut plug blocks to completely fill the passages, hiding the portcullis slabs and making the entire route appear to be solid, continuous stone. This final claustrophobic work was performed with intense concentration. The atmosphere inside was one of profound finality, a world being sealed away from the light forever. The pyramid's completion was marked by two final, painstaking acts: the application of the polished skin and the erasure of the temporary world. The final layer of work involved the polished white Tura limestone casing stones, which had to be perfectly fitted. This finishing work was done from the top down, meaning the final geometry of the pyramid, the perfect straight lines meeting at the peak, were completed last. Imagine the psychological shift. After decades of focusing on brute force and hauling, the attention turns to microscopic precision. The atmosphere on the upper levels of the ramp was one of intense, silent focus. The only sounds were the light, almost musical tink-tink of small stone hammers tapping the surface, and the constant rasp of sand blocks smoothing the limestone to a mirror-like finish. This final aesthetic phase was the crowning achievement, ensuring the finished pyramid gleamed brilliantly under the desert sun. The finished pyramid was encased entirely in highly polished white Tura limestone casing stones. This external layer was the pharaoh's public statement. The final aesthetic phase was the most visually stunning, the polishing. Specialized masons, working from the top down as the ramps were removed, used abrasive sand blocks and water to rub the entire surface of the pyramid into a perfect, uniform gleam. The sound was a continuous high-pitched rasp of stone on stone, a sound of purification, removing every imperfection and ensuring the structure would reflect the desert sun like a mirror. Following the polishing was the act of reverse logistics, the complete and utter decommissioning of the site. The colossal ramps, the temporary mountain that made the entire structure possible, had to be dismantled. This was a multi-year effort of tearing down the ramparts of clay, mud brick and gypsum that had covered the pyramid. The dominant sound shifted to the creak and groan of massive timbers being pushed, dragged and broken apart, and the endless shuffle. The entire site was scrubbed clean of all evidence of the building process: tools, refuse, construction materials. The pyramid was left gleaming white and isolated, standing alone on the plateau, a monument seemingly born directly from the rock, entirely detached from the decades of human effort that created it. When the work was done for the day, the laborers did not melt back into the desert. They returned to the workers' city, the massive, permanent settlement built right beside the pyramid, discovered and excavated by archaeologist Mark Lehner. This was not a slave camp. It was a thriving, organized, bustling town. Imagine walking through the streets of this city at dusk. You see organized barracks for the massive rotating workforce, and vast bakeries capable of producing immense quantities of food every single day. You hear the sound of cooking, the deep rhythmic grind of the enormous millstones preparing the next day's grain, and the lowing of cattle being prepared for the next provision. The defining smell is the heavy, yeasty odor of fresh-baked bread and fermenting beer, mixed with the dry desert air. The sheer scale of the food preparation operation, the endless fires, the constant activity, was the true logistical wonder of the entire Giza project. This commitment to sustenance was total. The state provided guaranteed rations, clean housing, and even advanced medical care. Archaeological evidence from the workers' cemeteries reveals surgically set fractures and rudimentary surgeries. This proved that the state invested heavily in treating and retaining its skilled workforce. The pyramid, when viewed through the lens of history, is not a monument to the pharaoh alone. It is a profound, enduring testament to logistical excellence, to the power of a human workforce united by a consistent rhythm and a promise of steady sustenance. The final tasks for the builders were to install the smooth, white casing stones working from the top down, and then to remove the colossal earthen ramps that had allowed the blocks to ascend. The noise of the hammers, the scrape of the sledges, the rhythm of the hauling chants, all of it faded. The structure was sealed. The sounds of construction were replaced by the profound, finished silence of the monument itself. We leave the desert now. The quiet reality of the workers' lives settled in our minds. The process of building a mountain from the earth was slow, simple, and utterly dependent on the steady discipline of the man, the sledge, and the chant. Thank you for joining me on this long journey into the past. I hope the story of this quiet process has brought the enduring organization of the ancient world to life. I wish you a calm and peaceful night.